welcome you to this episode of the Humpty Project, where I'm joined today by someone I met, I think, in October of last year, Carolyn Wonders. I met her on LinkedIn. We were sharing commentary on a post by Tony Hargis, and we were talking about absent male voices. And I couldn't find the post, so I can't say exactly what drew me to Carolyn, but what Carolyn was saying really resonated with me, and we've been having discussions by way of LinkedIn, messaging, so forth for a little while now, and gotten to know each other. And she agreed to be on this podcast. So, welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here, Carolyn. You live in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, correct?
Yes, exactly.
So, what I'd like you to do, since people on my network don't know who you are, just share a bit about your story, who you are, where you are today.
Absolutely. I think my story is a little bit typical for artists in the sense that I was a very creative kid and was very attracted to the art field and anything design and anything creative, really, even music. And but the messages I received as a child were more about going to college and working and doing those kinds of things and getting a job and making a living. And I think that is a very typical life trajectory of an artist. Happens to a lot of us. Reality hits us and we have to make money and we go into a different direction. And that's pretty much what I did. After college, I have a degree in art, but after college, I ended up going into business and leaving art behind for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And then came back to it recently in 2019. I ended my career in corporate America and moved forward into the world of art. And that's where I am now.
Yeah, I've got to keep notes because I tend to have these squirrel moments that if I don't, I'll forget exactly what I wanted to say. But it's interesting that after 30 years you found your passion.
Mm-hmm.
That may or may not be typical, but you weren't practicing art for
No.
really for that 30-year period in any great degree, other than you were a graphic artist, right? You've been involved in marketing and graphic design.
Well, what happened after I got my art degree is that I started to self-teach myself graphic design. I did not go to school for graphic design, and kind of funny to age myself a little bit, but we didn't even have computers on our desks back then or anything like that. So I remember going to a local copy shop, and I would be on their computers and started learning how to make brochures and advertisements, and I would do my resume and things like that there.
Right.
And I just kind of grew from there and just started creating things and making things. I was in my own business for a number of years in the beginning where I was doing workshops and seminars with a partner. And so during that time, of course, we needed all that marketing. We needed, emails. We needed, brochures. We needed, mailing pieces. And so I started doing that, and that kind of grew into a marketing career. And I think that all along, and because you had mentioned that I wasn't actually practicing art or doing art during those years. And I think that I had convinced myself that graphic design or marketing was the creative outlet that I needed or that was going to fulfill me. And it really didn't. I mean, it really didn't turn out that way. And I think over the years, what happened to me is I started really becoming focused on my career. I also was a single stay-at-home, not a stay-at-home, I went from a stay-at-home mother to a single mother very quickly. And when that happened, it really was the fuel behind my climb. Because at that point, I realized that it was on me. And I had to be not only their role model, but also I had to make money to
Right.
to put a roof over our heads and make sure there was food on the table. And that process it really made me, it was fuel, it was a drive, it it made me really seek out knowledge and how I was going to get ahead and make the money that I needed to make. And I think that kind of took over, you know. It was a pursuit of wanting to almost prove myself that I could do it. I think that also it was just necessary.
Sure.
You know, it was just completely. It wasn't like I had the option of, you know, taking a lower position. I always wanted to, you know, grow and become better, which is also just a part of my nature as well.
It's interesting to me because I sometimes wonder, did I fall into loving what I do, or have I rationalized that what I do, I you know, it's a matter of just enjoying what you're doing in the moment and making the best of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I was young, I was enamored of making money and moving out of my parents' house as early as I could, and I was able to do that at 18. And you could
Me
find
too.
a job that paid you well enough to be able to live on your own back there in the late
Back then.
70s.
Mm-hmm.
Late 70s, early 80s. But I sometimes, you know, I never considered myself creative. I was very much I don't want to say it, certain words I try not to use. I had a slavish obsession toward, you know, to making it because I didn't go to college. Unlike you, I wasn't pushed toward college. I didn't have any mentors that went to college, so I didn't have that pull, and I didn't have any knowledge of how to even get there. But I was in roles where all my colleagues, and I still am today, have advanced degrees beyond, you know, beyond a 4-year degree, MBAs and master level degrees. So I used money and accumulated things to kind of show that I made it. You know, that was my insecurity, but was very driven that way, and never considered myself very creative. But I was mentioning to you before we turned on the session and hit the record button, I said, podcasting, video casting for me is a bit of an art form for me. It's my creative outlet. It makes me feel like I'm doing something beyond just, you know, making a buck. So it's my way of giving back. If I ever were to make any money doing this, fantastic, but it's not a primary objective. And one of the things I'm trying to do better when I host people on this, Caroline, is to not talk so much. So I'm going to try not to do that. But I remember when you and I talked last week, we followed up on the absent male voices, and I told you how since 2018 I've really been trying to be not only reactively but proactively use my voice, and this podcasting is a way to bring your voice to other people in my network. So what male voices do you recall from your early family life or your time in corporate? Because I know the time in corporate became year by year even more toxic for you.
Yeah, I mean, what can I ask you? What do you mean by male voices or the absence of male voices? I think I need to understand that a little bit better.
Well, from my point of view, I'm curious to see how you adapted to, you know, men that you perceived or told you had to fit in a certain box, and how men around you, at many industries, are somewhat male dominated, although marketing, customer service can be more women dominated, or
Absolutely.
at least have a higher representation of women. When were men notably absent when they shouldn't have been? When could have or should have men use their voices? Or that's a big part of what I try to do, is say to men, look, I was afraid to use my voice because I didn't know how to. I was afraid to use my voice because I tend to call out, and I'm pretty quick and maybe sharp-tongued, so I'm trying to call in more, which is not my strength, so I have to zip sometimes. But I'm trying to tell men, hey, it's okay for you to use your voice appropriately. There's times where you need to just call somebody out in a meeting and say, hey, that's, you know, don't talk to her that way. Don't talk over that person. It may not even be a woman. What what situations might come top of mind to you where you said, wow, if a man would have been treated this way, it would have been completely different? Uh, I would have
Oh, pretty
reacted
much.
differently, or I've seen men react differently in industry than I've ever been able to act.
Yes. Oh, I mean, I have so many examples of that. I don't recall any male voices supporting me really at
Right,
all.
right there's a takeaway.
I mean, I don't, I think more, that's why I asked you about male voices, because for me it's really been the absence of male voices. And I think we also need to talk about the absence of female voices. One of the things that I saw quite often in my corporate life was the way that men mentor each other and bring other men along with them and teach them or involve them in things where they can learn. And for women, it's not like that.
Can I
We
can
don't,
I
we
interrupt
don't,
and ask
yeah.
you? And clearly, there's always exceptions. Uh, you can't put everything into a monolithic, binary. All men this, all women that. But my observation, and as I've put myself out there to learn more and to ask, listen, and believe to women's stories, my observation is that a lot of women, two things. A lot of women first emulate what they see as strength in a male manager, and they maybe overcompensate for that.
Yes, I've seen that a
Uh,
lot.
and then secondly, it's it's almost like, and this could be very cynical, but what I've observed with some women, it's almost like I'm not helping you because there's only so many spots for people that look like me in this room, and I'm not helping you in creating another female competitor, another person of color competitor. Is that that's the experience you
Yes, absolutely.
seem to be saying? I'm not wrong for seeing and observing that.
You're absolutely not wrong about that. Absolutely not wrong. In fact, one of the companies I worked for, we had three very, very strong, including myself, managers. And it was a small company, so as managers, we were kind of second tier. So just above us was executives, and that was pretty much the entire structure:
Hmm.
executive, management, and then staff. And we were three very, very powerful voices in the company, but we could not work together.
Hmm.
And it was one of the saddest things I have ever really experienced in corporate America, because I respected these women's skills. They were incredibly competent. They were incredibly confident. They had math skills that could help so many people, but it was always a fight with each other.
Right.
And the thing that people need to understand about that is that when when anybody, male, female, whatever it is, you're put into a situation where you're having to fight for resources, you're going to compete,
Right.
just like you just said. So this is a kind of a non-business example, but one of the things that I love to watch is that bachelor program.
Hmm.
What is it
I know
called?
of it.
Bachelor, Bachelorette. Yeah, so the Bachelor, Bachelorette. So interesting thing about that show is that they never thought that the Bachelorette would be successful, because they, number one, they didn't think that um, that was going to be interesting to anybody. And I'll tell you what's fascinating about that show is that if you put men in the exact same situation that you put women in, they act exactly the same way.
I haven't watched the show, so are
You don't need to. It's a terrible show. It's actually, I think, one of the worst shows out there. But I used to watch it just for the sociological, curiosity I
interactions.
have. Like, what happens when you take men and put them in the exact same situation where they are fighting for one thing. They're fighting for that one person, and
So backstabbing.
they start backstabbing, they start competing with each other, they start fighting, they start acting stupid. I mean, it's really fun to watch, honestly. But it is a TV show, it's not reality, but it just hit me that I shouldn't say it hit me during the show. I knew it ahead of time just from experience. But when people need to compete in order to get ahead, they're going to compete. They're going to fight with each other. And if
Right.
resources are slim, for example, I worked in a small company. It wasn't like we had tons of money to do all the things we wanted, but when you have an idea or things that you want to bring to the company, or a new way of doing something, you're going to compete with those people that also have ideas, right? And women are put into a position, I think, in corporate organizations that make that even more difficult. And so you're going to see competition, you're going to see backbiting, you're going to see people not supporting each other or supporting each other as women. There's also, at least in my experience, was always this, it almost felt like to speak about women's issues or to bring those up was almost a weakness.
Okay.
Seen as a weakness, that you couldn't hack it, or you couldn't do it any other way, or you couldn't join in with the boys and be like them, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I hope.
I think so. I was raised by my mom and my grandmother, and I think I've had a lot of influence from women in my life, where I've never really felt tremendously comfortable in being one of the boys. So I don't relate as well as some men. But what I was thinking as you were talking about that is how what characterizes me in negatively in much of my life is a really bad temper, a foul
I
temper.
got one of those too.
Okay, well, really quick to react, say things I shouldn't, throw things sometimes. Never, I don't get into fights. I'm not a big guy. I'm not good with the hands, but I talk aggressively sometimes. But I've gotten a lot better at this as I've gotten older, and that's entirely another episode. But what I've observed in being able to sometimes maybe look back as a third party when I'm in meetings or in conferences or just in any situation, be it at the office or any other social dynamic, is Robert's passionate, Carolyn's emotional.
Exactly.
You know, he's exhibiting leadership characteristics, at least, right? He's fighting for what he believes in, things like that, and it's allowed me to really behave poorly for too long. I think what I did in the 80s and early 90s, I'd probably be fired for today. But
Probably.
yeah, and I think rightly so, quite frankly. But I was given a lot of free passes, and still am given free passes. There was a manager in one of the companies I worked for. He was a high level manager. I was a lab tech, and they soundproofed his office. They put extra layers of insulation in because he was always just banging on desks and screaming.
Oh yeah. What year was
And
this?
that behavior was tolerated. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, because he's a man, and men are
Yeah.
passionate about these
Yeah.
things, but they're not emotional. Their head is fully on when they're like, no. When I'm that way, my head is not fully on. I am not mindful. I am not intentional. I am just letting rage take over because it's easy. And with men, we fall into it because it's easy. So often we are allowed to have bad behaviors promulgate as a result.
Yes, and we're not allowed to have bad behaviors. I mean, I'll give you two examples right there of what you're talking about. One was very, very early in my career. If I could give you a year, I think I graduated college like 89, 90. And it was one of my first jobs out of college. So it was an all male workforce. It was a pre-press company. So I was kind of going into that art space of design and printing and all that kind of stuff. I was hired as a customer service rep. It was me and another woman in a room with a man who, of course, was our manager. And we were the only two females on that floor. There was one other female in the entire building, and she was the boss or the owner's daughter.
Right.
And she worked in the office, helping him in the office. We, it, I mean, talk about the wild, wild west. I mean, that was a very, very interesting place to work and to have my first experiences in corporate America. I guess you would call it a corporate America, or at least manufacturing or whatever. Yeah, so in this company, the men would be upset about something. For example, the quality control manager would be upset because the jobs kept coming through and they weren't right, and they weren't what the customer needed, and he would on occasion get so mad that he would be yelling and screaming and throwing things across the room. And you know, again, in today, that behavior is not really tolerated
Right.
in most workplaces, but back then it was. And at that job, I was fired from that job. I was fired because they said women are just too emotional
Yeah.
to be working here.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating because if anything, the women that worked there really tried to control their emotions as much as possible because we were around this kind of stuff all the time.
Right.
I went from, starting in customer service to being their very first female sales rep in the entire history of the company,
Wow.
which was over 50 years old.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I was seen as, going way above and beyond my pay grade, so to speak. And while I worked really, really hard to try to learn sales, what they were really hiring me to do is they thought I looked cute,
Hmm.
and they wanted me to be in sales so that I could go out and talk to all the advertising agencies and perhaps convince some of these old guys to go to lunch with me.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And in those days, my fellow sales reps, the men, were taking these customers to strip joints for lunch.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were taking,
I've been to
they
some.
were,
I've been out on those calls.
so they were taking them to baseball games on the weekends, and a young 20-some-year-old, essentially girl, well, woman,
Yeah.
doing that in sales was different than it is today. It would be, like me at 20 something asking some 40 or 50-year-old guy if I could take them out, for dinner on the weekend and then take them
Yeah.
to a baseball game. It was just the whole game was beyond something that I could even really do.
Yeah.
And then I was fired for it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I worked in one of my first jobs before I took a sales-based position. I should actually say my last job before I took a sales-based position. I was a lab technician, quality assurance, and I would dissect high power underground voltage, high voltage, high power underground connectors. Because I knew every connector that was made for the last 30, 40 years, the salespeople, which was all guys, would have me come to their shows and show how to use these things. Because their jobs pretty much was to take people out and get them drunk, take them to strip clubs, probably do more behind closed doors. I mean, we literally had the double mint twins at our booth. If you're old enough to remember the double mint twins,
I think
the,
I recall that.
yeah, there was these two girls, that in
Oh,
Austin
like,
Powers type of film
ugh,
pants,
ugh.
as I remember them. It was, and there's still industries like that. Still, some of the industrial products, machine tools industry. There's still quite a lot of that. Booth
Yuck.
babes and so forth. Younger
Ew.
girls they hire in scant outfits to pose in photographs. In my industry, what I call my industry, it's electronic components and industrial automation. There's less and less of that, but there's still some of that,
Wow.
and I find it cringe. So,
Oh,
I have a 29-year-old daughter, and
yeah.
that's part of the reason why. But one of the things that comes to mind that I'd like to share here in context of what we're talking about is I used to think it'd be a great example to say to men, look, you don't like, you've got, let's say, a fancy old motorhead car from the 1970s, an old Maybe you've got an old Shelby Mustang or something. And if somebody said, "Hey, I'd like to drive that car," you'd say, "No, no, this is my car. I don't let anybody drive." "Oh, come on, just let me take it around the block. I'll be careful." "No, no, no. It's I'm sorry, but no. Oh, please, just one time. Just trust me. It'll be fine." If somebody just hopped in that car and said, "I took it anyway," we'd be pretty pissed. And I used to use that as an example of how men might understand the concept of no means no, right? If you're told no, it means no, not, "Well, you left the keys on the seat, so, I just took it around. I didn't damage it. I just took it around the block." Then I realized that that could resonate with men for one reason, and that is because men are seeing their daughter or their wife or their sister as something they have to protect, as almost their property.
Right.
And so I try not to think that way anymore. But that's so much of another thing I focused on is masculinity, and how men are so often brought that we have to be the providers and the sole breadwinners in some cases, and we have to take care of our women. It's almost like they are our property as chattel or something. And I don't know why.
Well, not
I thought
only
that
that,
was
but
relevant.
what do we need protection from?
Well, that's a good point. What do we need
Other
protection
men.
from if we're not dangerous? If men aren't dangerous? Oh, and that'll just fire up some people, that they'll talk about how men get abused, and how there are, how there are statistics that show that men die younger, and life is much harder on men. And there's lots of to that. But when you get into the simple fact that men don't walk around with a car key in their hands, between their fingers. I used to be a runner. I've never gone out for a solo run and worried that I was going to be accosted and pulled aside and molested. I've never worried that somebody's going to put something in my drink. I've never said, "Hey, watch my drink while I'm in the bathroom." And it's those sorts of things, those insidious things that, that lead me to say, I want to use my voice to say to men how to be more appropriate, and use your voice when people aren't being appropriate.
Right. And what does it mean to be a bystander?
If you just saw a post I did on, I copied actually a fellow named Jeremy Stockdale. I copied something off one of his posts. You might have seen it. And a woman, I can't say exactly what she said because I forget verbatim, but it basically was, we need to move from being bystanders to standing by as active participants, being aware and alert.
Yes.
And so that's what many times I find myself, Carolyn, unable to respond to something because it's like, whoa, that's so 1983 or something, or so unexpected. I don't even know how to respond to a man in a situation. But I had a situation in a role where somebody very senior to me, a C-suite person, talked about man's genitals in front of a number of people, and I didn't know how to react. But I was able by chance to be one-on-one with him the next day, and I brought it up, knowing that this person has the power to fire me. And he legitimately said, "Oh, I shouldn't have said that, should I? I should apologize, shouldn't I?" And that's what I'm trying to do, get people to learn and to hear from women that have lived it and experienced it.
Yeah.
A lot of what I talk about is masculinity, femininity, and kind of blending the two, and not ascribing purely masculine traits only to men and purely feminine to only women. How to have a balance and use traits appropriately and intentionally. And many times so-called masculine traits, they're associated with violence and aggression, and maybe there certainly is times when that's necessary, to protect oneself from harm, or from threats of violence. But oftentimes it's just an amygdala reaction, the base of your brain. Just the first thing that men are trained to think is just react. That's not intentional or mindful. So I like to talk to women and learn more about how I can be a better ally, and as a bystander, actually standing by on alert, ready to assist, ready to say something, ready to pull somebody aside or diffuse or deflect, and make a situation less volatile. And then hopefully some other men on the sidelines will put down their pom-poms and stop just cheering and join in.
Well, you mentioned something that kind of resonated, and that is that sometimes when you hear certain things, you're so shocked almost, or especially in a professional situation, because we're expected to, have a certain decorum. And that happens to women all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember being in meetings where my own boss would come right out and say, "Well, that's ridiculous," something like, and I'm just, okay, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to be supporting me here?
Right.
What is happening in this meeting that my voice is being silenced? But there's no awareness of it, and then also to be able to, in the moment, be able to speak intelligently and come up with a comeback or a way of saying something that would cause people to listen and understand and see what's happening.
Right.
That's really hard to do. I mean, not a lot of people have those skills, and I would argue to say that most women are not raised with those kinds of skills either. We're not even really programmed, or
I think women especially are told to be quiet.
Yes.
It's
and
better.
when we're not, and I've never been a quiet person ever my entire
Yeah,
life.
I sense that.
We're told to be quiet because that is the feminine, right? To be,
Right.
and you also talked, which I would like to comment on, is the feminine and the masculine, and I question a lot of that, because I think of it more as a yin and yang. I think of it more as we all possess female qualities, we all possess male qualities or masculine qualities, and how those manifest in each of us is different.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm sorry, I'm really cold. I turned my heater on a little bit.
I'm not. It's cold here in Southern California. It's 63 degrees out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's cold
That's
for
cold
us.
for you. For us, it's below zero right now. So,
Yikes.
but it seems my heater's not quite working.
Yeah, so the yin and yang, I think we all do. We all do possess, and I think that what we consider traditionally masculine, I don't know how to verbalize, but it needs to be counterbalanced by empathy and other feminine. And that's why I think so much about mindfulness. Be mindful in what you're thinking, saying, doing.
Right. And when you see so-called masculine qualities in a female, I think that's, we get labeled a bitch. I mean, it's really interesting, because when in corporate America, or at least the corporate America I experienced, when a woman is called a bitch, it's a badge of honor, because it's you're finally at that point where you're pushing the envelope enough to have somebody who is, I would consider, less educated or more ignorant fight back against that.
Yeah.
And so it's literally something I think I would put on my wall. I mean, that's one of the ways that I used to deal with some of these things in corporate America, is, I would have men use these words to describe me as being like, I can't even think of them right now, but, too loud, too boisterous, too forward, too pushy, all those kinds of words. And I would just take those words and I would write them in my office on the wall, on my on my whiteboard. And then people come in, why do you have those on there? Well, that's what I was called this week.
I watched the is it the 6888, I think it's called, 6888th Women's Army Corps Battalion that delivered mail during World War II. It was an all
Yes. I
and
saw
at one point,
that. I loved it.
Kerry Washington said something, again, I can't necessarily say it verbatim, and it was referring to the fact that they're black women, but I think women face this in general in business, and that is, we don't have the burden to be as good as the men. We have the burden to be better. And I do think that, because if a man can, again, express certain emotions and be seen as powerful and passionate and authentic, while a woman is being something completely different.
Yeah, I would like to give an example of that,
Please.
if that's okay. And I saved this and I kind of put it to my side here, because this is something I've observed because I was in a lot of meetings. Of course, corporate America is all meetings, right? So I spent a lot of time observing male behavior in these meetings. And I wrote a list of all the things that I saw. And I saw things like men falling asleep. I saw things like men adjusting their, down here while we're in a meeting.
Okay.
Um, I've seen men miss meetings without apologizing or being late
Right.
without apologizing or let's see what else. I've seen men with like massive amounts of paperwork and being completely disorganized and not being able to say, or talk about the agenda at hand or not preparing for the meeting. I've heard the word ball buster in meetings. I've heard horrendous things said to women in meetings. And as you have, I've heard men talk about the size of their genitals in
Yeah.
meetings. And then me, I was literally taken aside once by the CEO of the company and told that I looked too scattered
Looked
and
scattered.
frazzled when I come to meetings and that I didn't look professional and it did not help my credibility.
Carolyn, I have to tell you candidly that I might have said that to you 10 or 15 years ago, certainly 20 or 30 years ago. I used to be stuck in that whole professionalism thing too. You look a certain way. And I was struck yesterday or the day before by watching, I was not watching much in terms of live TV, but I was watching more podcasts on the confirmation hearings that are ongoing.
Mm.
And just stricken by the fact that the person nominated to be Secretary of Defense he kept talking about meritocracy and he's horribly unqualified for the job. And second, how his square jawline and nice hair and fit body would make him look professional and strong, and that's what we've been raised to think, that this is a good, strong. Even some senator asked him how many push-ups he could do. I mean,
Oh
Jesus,
my God.
pathetic. I could probably do more push-ups than most of those clowns. But anyway, I kept thinking about how I know because I've been there. I'd say, oh, this is a good, masculine, professional-looking person, and he is automatically elevated to a higher position.
Right,
Automatically seen as more competent coming in. Everybody else has hurdles now they have to go over just to reach that level, and he's horribly unqualified. He's horribly unqualified, and so I love to say mediocre white male syndrome is a thing
it
because I think a
definitely is.
lot of mediocre white males kind of in their subconscious know it. And there's times that I say I know I wouldn't be in the position I'm in today as a non-college degree uh, professional that's had the title vice president, director, and so forth, and I'm a director now.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think that's still happening.
Yeah, yeah, but I know for sure one thing. When I was hired at a company that gave me the break, later I would interview somebody for customer service who was a black gentleman, and the owner said, "You can't hire him because you can't fire black people." He would
Oh
tell
my
me,
God.
"Oh, that woman looks pregnant. You can't hire her." You know, so I mean, I know how people think. It's how I thought because that's the way things were, and I've learned to see things a lot differently. And so part of my art form is challenging myself to paint a different palette in my mind and see things differently through different lenses. And the podcasting and video casting like this helps me to feel like I'm doing something positive in the world. So one of the things I'll wrap up with is Carolyn does wonders with art as well. Pun intended, right? Dad joke. But um, I'm happy
I
to
hear
say
it.
that when I showed my wife your work, that she and I were both drawn to the same piece, and we're going to be featuring that in our family room in a few weeks. And it's a piece that talks to social justice, particularly around women. So uh, I will be sharing some information so those that want to view your art are able to connect with you. Is the best way to connect with you through carolynwonders.com, or would you also encourage a LinkedIn connection from people?
Absolutely both.
Okay, so we'll share both of that as in comments wherever we post this, but I'll also create a share on the screen so those that are watching the video cast will be able to know how to connect with you.
Thank you.
I'm hoping that you might want to do some more of these. I think the masculinity topic and some of those things that you wrote down might conjure up another podcast videocast session.
Absolutely. I would be
for
happy
now,
to.
I'll say that I'm always very awkward about finishing the podcast. So like, comment, subscribe. I never say that. This has been fun, and I think we
Great.
connect pretty well.
Yeah.
I hope
I
people see
agree.
that in the final cut.